this is NeonEX here, and I'm bringing you my first in probably a 5 to 6 part series on an introduction to the basics of Dark Souls 3. I would say this is one of my favorite games as of recent, of the past 2 years or so. I haven't really been playing it long. I do not consider myself an expert by no means on this game. This is a series where I hope to learn as much from you guys as I hope you guys learn from me. So first off, in this episode, we're going to be talking about briefly on the different kinds of classes that you can pick as in the beginning of Dark Souls 3. If you're a beginner looking into getting into the series, I highly suggest watching this whole 5 to 6 episode series that I'm going to get. You can basically call this an introduction to Dark Souls 3 for beginners, in a sense. Out of all the classes, what are there? 12 classes, I think? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 classes. Alright. Out of all the classes, there are 10. One thing to keep in mind if you are a beginner to Dark Souls 3, your class is extremely important early game. But once you get maybe just a couple episodes, a couple arenas or areas into the game, your character is going to be more customized towards your own game style. So it really doesn't matter which class you start out with, because in the end it's going to be customized and created into your own character, because that's what Dark Souls 3 is all about. It's about customization and feeling comfortable playing the way you want to play. But if you're looking for a recommendation on what class you should start out as, if you are a beginner to the game, I highly recommend the Knight, the Warrior, or the Herald. The Knight, because it comes with the best set of armor plus a really good shield and weapon just starting off. The Warrior comes with excellent strength stat as well as pretty high vigor, which is important because vigor is tied directly to your health. And the Herald allows you to both run with a medium of strength and dexterity with a versatility of different weapons to use, plus a pretty high faith stat, which means you can use some miracles early on for that extra healing. So those 3 classes I would highly recommend for beginners in the game. So, like I was getting at, the starting classes are not the most important thing for beginners. Something that will be extremely important to learn if you're getting into this game is this screen right here. It might look extremely intimidating, especially to new players, but that's what this series is all about. For this particular episode, not only are we going to be going over the classes, which we just went over, but we're also going to be talking about all the different types of stats, or the attributes, and their meaning and what they're directly tied to. So, if you start off, the very first stat we are going to talk about, let's get back into that screen. We'll start directly with your vigor. It's vigor is a stat that is one of the big 3. By big 3, I mean it is one of the 3 most important things to pay attention to while leveling up in Dark Souls 3. So whatever you do, just do not overlook leveling up this stat. Now, that being said, it's extremely important to have this stat, but not over-leveled. I would recommend going to the areas of 20 to 25, leveling this up. That gives you plenty of HP to where you can not get one-shot by too many enemies in the game. Also, some of the bosses won't be able to one-shot you as well. Not only does vigor govern your HP, but it also helps with your frost resistance. That is pretty good, but all in all, Dark Souls 3 does not have that many weapons or enemies that really inflict frost damage. I think if I'm just shouting a number off the top of my head, there's like 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 enemies that do frost damage, and one of them is a boss. So it's not really too important to have frost resistance, but basically what happens is if your character gets too much of frost damage, your stamina bar will not increase as fast as it normally would. So, for instance, if you look at my green bar at the top, it goes up relatively fast. But if I had frost damage on, the return rate is about as fast as if you were holding up a shield. You see the difference on how my stamina bar comes up? And that's pretty bad, actually, because stamina is extremely important. But, so I would recommend highly that you pay attention to vigor, but I also would not recommend going too high, just because not too many enemies inflict frost damage, but you still need that HP. Next up is your attunement attribute. Now, the attunement, it directly affects your spell slots and your focus power. If you look into the middle row right in there, up at base power, here, I'll actually just show you. It'd probably be easier if I just show you. Right here, the FP. It's required to use spells, skills, use of Acid Essence Flask, or rest at bonfire to replenish. It's basically the amount of uses you'll have for your spells. This is not really too important for people who are not going to be using miracles, sorceries, or pyromancies, but it is extremely important for people who are. This stat will affect how many spells you can, your character can use. So, for example, where are the spell slots? I actually am not paying attention enough to be able to see. There they are. If you look at the bottom left corner of the screen, my bad, the bottom right corner of the screen, I need to learn my left and rights, you got my attunement slots. Right now, my character can only use one spell, but the higher my attunement goes, the more spells I'll be able to use. Pretty easy and nice, easy to learn. It also will allow for more continuous uses of your spells, like I just said, because it will raise your FP bar. Your FP bar is the amount of spells you will be able to use. If you look at the screen at the HUD, the FP bar is represented by the blue bar. It is in between the stamina bar, which is the green, and the HP, which is the red. Now, going on to the next stat is your endurance. Now, endurance is the second of the big 3 that you need to pay attention to, but in my opinion, it is the most important stat in the entire game. Not only does it increase your lightning and bleed resistances, which is actually pretty important because a good majority of enemies use lightning damage and will give you and has bleed damage. So I highly recommend upgrading your endurance. But not only is it for the lightning and bleed resistance, but it also directly affects every battle movement. Every kind of movement you make in the game other than just walking, it will affect. It affects how you swing your sword. It affects how long you can block with your shield. It affects you being able to use sorceries, miracles, or pyromancies. It affects whether or not you'll be able to dodge effectively. Basically, every movement in the game other than just standard walking uses the stamina bar. As you can see, look at the green bar at the top, that is your stamina bar. I swing my sword, it goes down. I try to run, it gradually goes down. If I'm holding up my shield, for an example, let's find an enemy. This would actually be a little bit easier. The dreaded fog wall, let's just wait for the area outside to kind of load up. But, you hold up your shield, you'll and you get hit by an enemy, it will drain your stamina. There's no reason for me to go outside for that. It will drain your stamina. You go to roll and dodge from your enemies, it drains your stamina. So the most important stat in the game is your endurance. And not only that, but you have to make sure stamina management. If you do not pay attention to how low your stamina bar is, you will not do too well in the game. You will get killed. Because if your stamina bar runs out and you get hit, you get recoil damage, or not recoil, but you get recoiled, and for a good 2 seconds you can't do anything, and that you can take a lot of damage in 2-3 seconds. Let's go ahead and move on to the next stat. The next stat is your vitality. And do not get this confused with health, because I know in other RPGs vitality means health, but vigor is your health. Vitality, it governs your physical defense, though it is also affected by other attributes. It will govern, more importantly, your maximum equip load and your poison resistances. Vitality is number 3 of the big 3 stats. Just because if you don't pay attention to your vitality, you won't be able to use, or if you don't invest in vitality and you go through the game, you'll find weapons and armor throughout the game that you might really want to use, but you won't be able to because your equipment load will be too high. It's kind of hard for me to show you on this, but dang it, give me a second, guys. Explanation. Right here, your equipment load is the total weight of equipped weapons and armor. Movement slows as load increases, exceeding the rightmost number, and movement slows dramatically. As you can see, it's 33.3 out of 55. What does that mean? Essentially, if you go to your equipment and look in the bottom right screen again, you got equipment load down there right above your poise. The 33.3 again, but then if you look in the top right corner, you got your weight ratio. It's at 60.5%. So basically, the 33.3 out of 55 is 60.5% of the weight I can carry. That's 60.5%. Keep that under 70%. If you go over 70%, you will do what's called a fat roll. You will not be able to dodge, your stamina will increase slower, and your movements will be slower. Now, what increases or decreases the equipment load? That is right here. Everything that is currently equipped, minus your arrows, your covenant, and your quick item selects. So basically your rings, your armor, and your weapons and shields. If you go to one, the long sword, it's a straight sword. The standard / thrust weapon, it's a stance. The FP cost doesn't really matter. But the weight, that's what will affect it. The weight is a 3. So it adds 3. If I take it off, if you look at the top right corner again, the 33.3 goes down to 30.3 because I took it off. Everything has a weight to it. That weight adds to your equipment load. So manage your weight effectively, and if it turns out the things that you want to use make you go over the allotted 70%, you can go over. If you choose to, you can go over the 70%. But if you are a beginner at Dark Souls 3, I highly recommend that you stay below 70%. You will be able to dodge and your enemy's attacks a lot easier. But for instance, if you do run into a weapon or a piece of armor that you really, really want to use, but it throws you over that 70%, don't worry. All you have to do is grind out some levels, and then, or grind out some souls, and then level up your vitality stat. Every time you level it up, to my knowledge, there's no soft or hard cap to it. Every time you level it up, it boosts your equipment load up by 1 point. And then eventually you will be able to get under 70% with the armor or weapons that you want. Now, that concludes what I would say, the easy stats to learn. Just because those stats are the stats that directly affect your character and no one else. Now, the rest of it, your strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith. Those 4 stats, yes, they affect your character in defenses, but they're more used for how much damage you can deal to your enemies. Starting off with the strength stat, it will increase your strength with strength scaling weapons. Now, what do I mean by strength scaling weapons? If you go to your weapons, all weapons, they scale with your stats. What does that mean? Down here at the bottom, you got your attribute bonuses. And this weapon has a D in strength and a D in dexterity. What that means is the higher your strength and the higher your dexterity, you will get a slight boost in damage for this weapon. I think it ranges from S, A, B, C, and D, and then no scaling. If I am wrong, please let me know, but I'm pretty sure that is how it goes. But, so for your strength stat, all weapons that scale with a strength bonus, the higher your strength stat is, the higher bonus your particular weapon will get. Strength stat also, it increases your fire resistance and your attack strength and increased defenses. So basically just your standard strength alone will increase your physical attack power for physical attacks. Not magic, not fire, not lightning, not dark, but physical. So the strength stat will increase your physical stat, and also with your defenses, including fire. Now, a lot of enemies use fire when it comes to maybe fire bombs or pyromancies or just fire-infused weapons. A lot of enemies and a lot of bosses have fire damage. So maybe I would bring strength up to at least 20-25 if you're not planning on using the strength stat. But as a beginner, I would bring it up just so you can have the extra fire defense. The next stat that we're going to be discussing is, I'm pretty sure, it is your dexterity stat. Just like your strength stat, the higher your dexterity, it will increase the scaling bonus you get for weapons that get a dexterity scaling bonus. It will also, the higher it is, the lower your spell casting speed time will be. So the higher dexterity, the higher or the faster rate you'll be able to use your pyromancies, your spells, or your miracles. And that's pretty important, especially for people who want to be able to dish out 5-6 fireballs in 15-20 seconds. But something that would also dexterity does that's pretty important, especially for beginners in the game. The higher your dexterity, the less fall damage you will receive when you fall. Yes, you take damage from falling from specific heights. You can even die from falling from specific heights. But you can minimize the damage you receive by increasing your dexterity stat. A lot of it, I actually did not know this until I started looking up information specifically for this series. But moving on, the next stat is your intelligence. The intelligence increases your spell damage required to meet requirements for specific sorceries. So specific sorceries require a specific amount of stats to be able to use. So for example, if you wanted to use a sorcery like, oh man, I can't remember, but just for an example, a shield definitely is not a spell. But if you look at the bottom, it has attribute requirements. It has a 13 in strength. Spells, if you look next to strength, the little arm, then you got the hand, then you got the book and the star. The book and the star are your intelligence and your faith. Spells will require a specific stat for you to use that specific spell. So if you have a spell that requires you to have at least an intelligence of 15 to use, you have to level up your intelligence to 15 to be able to use that stat. Not only does it do that, or it doesn't, excuse me, not only does it increase your spell damages, but it also increases your magic defense, and it affects your pyromancy damages as well. So scaling or leveling up your intelligence and also faith will increase the damage output that your pyromancies will be able to do. And increasing your intelligence will increase your magic defense. Now faith, on the other hand, exactly like intelligence, certain spells require a specific level to be able to use. So if you have a miracle that requires a faith level of 20, you have to have a faith of 20 to be able to use it. Now, faith, what else? Pretty sure faith is the one that increases your dark defense. If I am wrong on that, please let me know. But I'm pretty sure faith increases your dark defense as well as also your pyromancy output damage. Now we're going to get down to the luck stat. The luck stat, do not worry about. As a beginner to the game, do not worry about your luck stat. Luck determines your item discovery number. Meaning the higher your luck, the more likely your enemies will be to dropping items. This is very useful for farming specific items like Embers or Titanite shards or stuff like that. But if you are a beginner to the game, I would not worry about this. I would just leave this stat alone and focus on other things. Now, if you're sitting here saying that it does other things other than item discovery, you are correct. Because your luck stat will also affect directly your poison and bleed damage output. So the higher your luck stat, the easier it will be for you to poison and cause bleed damage to your opponents. This is more of a player versus player aspect than I would consider an in-game thing, because a lot of enemies are resistant to poison or resistant to bleed, mainly when it comes to bosses. So I highly recommend, if you are a beginner, just ignore this stat. Just ignore it. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about in this episode 1 on stats is your poise. Supposedly, poise determines whether or not you'll be able to effectively take damage or take hits without getting stunned or affected. You'll be able to continue attacking even though you're getting hit. What it says is the ability to withstand attacks without breaking form. Easy explanation. You can go to hit an enemy while getting hit at the same time, and your attack will still go through. You won't get stunned. Easy, simple. But from my experience in this game, Dark Souls 3 is very different from Dark Souls 1. Poise does not work the same as it used to. From my experience, poise just does not work. There's no way to level up your poise stat within your specific attributes. Poise levels up, or your number of poise gets higher depending on what weapons, armor, and shields you are holding, and also with specific spells that increase poise and rings. But from my experience, poise literally means nothing. It's all about effectively out-strategizing your opponents. But that was episode 1. We will cover the rest of the basics come episode 2, 3, 4, and I'm pretty sure 5. But I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.